For decades, the world fought wars over oil. Now, the battle is shifting underground: cobalt, lithium, copper, rare earth minerals. The resources powering electric cars, AI systems, missiles, batteries, and the future global economy. Africa has become the center of a silent global resource war, and powerful nations are circling fast. China already dominates many key mines. The West is scrambling to catch up. Militias, corruption, and foreign influence are exploding together. And once again, Africa risks becoming the battlefield for someone else's ambitions. Tonight, 5 retired spies give their brutally honest opinions on Africa's new resource wars. No spin, no diplomatic smiles, just experience. Let's begin. Back with us tonight, Texas Buck McCoy, Colonel Dimitri the Bear Volkov, Madame Li Wei, Sir Reginald Hawthorne, Lucas the Vault Brunner, 5 retired spies, 5 different world views. First question, is this really about development, or is this simply a new scramble for Africa?
This is absolutely a new scramble for Africa. Only this time, the prizes are cobalt, lithium, and rare earth minerals instead of oil and gold. China moved early and secured strategic mining relationships while the West focused elsewhere. Now, Washington suddenly realizes the future economy depends on African resources. Electric vehicles, AI infrastructure, missile systems, all of it depends on these minerals. Africa has become one of the most important geopolitical battlegrounds on Earth.
Dimitri's right about one thing. Africa is now strategically critical. China controls major cobalt supply chains and dominates rare earth processing capacity. The United States and Europe woke up late. But let's stop pretending China's model is some noble development mission. Beijing locked up critical mines through opaque deals, debt pressure, and relationships with deeply corrupt governments. Local militias are profiting. Corruption is exploding. This isn't just economics anymore, it's strategic resource warfare.
That is an oversimplified Western narrative, Buck. China invested in African infrastructure when many Western countries showed limited interest. Roads, ports, railways, energy projects. African governments chose those partnerships themselves. Of course there are problems, but African nations deserve the right to decide their own economic relationships. They are not pieces on someone else's chessboard.
Ah yes, the famous win-win partnership. Forgive me, Li Wei, but many Africans might question exactly who is winning more. Frankly, everyone here carries some blame. China aggressively secured resources. The West spent years moralizing instead of competing seriously. Local elites enriched themselves, militias seized opportunities, and ordinary Africans, they remained trapped in the middle, much as they were a century ago. History is repeating itself with newer slogans and shinier infrastructure.
From a neutral perspective, demand for critical minerals has fundamentally changed the geopolitical importance of Africa. Competition between major powers is accelerating rapidly. African governments are attempting to maximize leverage between competing partners. Unfortunately, governance weaknesses and corruption create instability around key mining regions. Long-term stability will require transparency and stronger institutions.
Lucas, my dear fellow, you always sound like a very expensive international conference. Meanwhile, armed groups are fighting over cobalt pits, while half the world pretends this is simply about supply chain optimization.
And emotional rhetoric without practical framework solves nothing, Reggie.
Oh, excellent. The British Empire versus Swiss neutrality. I was wondering how long that would take tonight. Let's go deeper. Who bears the most responsibility for this mess?
Responsibility is shared. China invested heavily because global demand was rising rapidly. Western countries are now trying to counter China through political pressure and strategic competition. Local governments and armed groups are also exploiting the situation. The problem is larger than any single country. Africa should not become another arena for Cold War thinking.
But Li Wei, China absolutely accelerated the race. Beijing aggressively locked up supply chains, while the West underestimated the importance of these minerals. Let's be honest, many of these agreements benefited political elites far more than local populations, and now China holds enormous leverage over industries critical to the future economy.
The West complains because China outplayed them strategically. For decades, former colonial powers extracted African wealth while offering lectures about governance. Now China arrives with infrastructure, investment, and long-term deals. Suddenly, everyone panics. Hypocrisy is remarkable.
Oh, spare us the moral purity lecture, Dimitri. Russia has hardly become Africa's ethical guardian. The truth is simpler. Every major power sees Africa's minerals as strategically essential. Everyone talks about partnership. Everyone wants leverage.
I believe the larger issue is structural demand. The global transition toward green technology and advanced manufacturing created enormous pressure on critical mineral supply chains. Competition was inevitable once these minerals became strategic assets. Without stronger governance and transparent agreements, instability was also predictable.
There he goes again. Structural demand. Lucas, you describe geopolitical knife fights like a central bank report.
And yet central banks survive longer than empires, Reggie.
Gentlemen, please. I only have one insurance policy for this studio. Let's move forward. What happens next?
I predict the United States and its allies will aggressively push for alternative supply chains outside Chinese control. More investment deals, more security partnerships, more strategic pressure. China will tighten its grip on existing mining operations. Local conflicts around mining regions will intensify. This competition is going to become much more aggressive.
I agree with Buck on one point. Things are about to become considerably uglier. European governments are already nervous about dependency on Chinese-controlled supply chains. Companies will face impossible choices between ethics, profits, and strategic necessity. And frankly, Africa risks becoming trapped between competing powers once again.
I believe African governments will become more skilled at balancing foreign partners. China will continue investing in long-term infrastructure and resource agreements. Western countries will respond with competing initiatives. Investment into local processing facilities may grow. However, security risks around mining regions will remain serious. Stability depends on mutual respect, not confrontation.
I predict the competition will become far more ruthless. Resource nationalism will rise. More African countries will try to play both sides for better deals. Proxy conflicts around strategic mines may intensify. Russia, China, the West, everyone wants influence. This is the new great game.
I expect prolonged instability rather than immediate collapse. Supply chain risks will increase. Political pressure around critical minerals will intensify. Neutral intermediaries may gain importance as tensions rise. However, without governance reforms, corruption and violence will remain deeply difficult to control.
Translation. Everyone's going to smile politely while fighting viciously underneath the table.
That may be the most accurate summary of geopolitics I've heard all year.
Worst case, full-scale proxy warfare across multiple African regions, foreign powers backing rival factions for control of strategic mines. Militas growing stronger, governments collapsing, onshore regions becoming permanent conflict zones, Africa paying the price for global competition once again. This is how empires behave when resources become desperate.
The humanitarian consequences would be devastating. Resource competition could fuel endless instability. Environmental destruction from uncontrolled mining may become irreversible. Developing countries worldwide would suffer from supply shortages and price shocks. Trust between nations could collapse completely.
The nightmare scenario is strategic panic. Major powers become desperate to secure mineral supplies at any cost. Supply chains collapse. Energy transitions stall. Armed groups seize critical mining zones. Suddenly, the world realizes the future economy depends on regions nobody bothered stabilizing properly.
For me, the darkest scenario is psychological. The world convincing itself this exploitation is somehow green progress. Electric cars in wealthy capitals, child labor and militias around cobalt pits elsewhere, history wrapped in environmentally friendly branding. That moral contradiction could poison global politics for generations.
The complete fragmentation of resource-rich states would create enormous long-term instability. Armed groups controlling strategic regions. Global supply disruptions becoming constant. Corruption deeply entrenched. International stabilization efforts repeatedly failing. Recovery from such a breakdown could take decades.
Dark warnings tonight. Final verdicts.
African nations deserve genuine sovereignty over their resources. External powers should focus on long-term partnerships and infrastructure, not destabilizing competition.
The West must compete seriously in Africa, or risk losing control over critical future industries. But competition without responsible governance will only fuel more instability.
Africa should not become another battlefield for Western panic over China's rise. Respect and mutual benefit remain more sustainable than pressure and sanctions. History is watching carefully.
Practical compromises and transparent agreements are essential. Stability in Africa serves everyone's long-term interests.
Africa has spent centuries being treated as a prize by outside powers. Different flags, different slogans. Same dangerous game. History has an unpleasant habit of repeating itself.
Another intense discussion from the Retired Spies Club. 5 retired spies. 5 very different perspectives. Which verdict resonated with you the most tonight? Let us know below. And if you enjoy these deep geopolitical conversations, subscribe and join the club. This is Cheesy Bond signing off. Stay curious, stay thoughtful, and remember, the world's quietest wars are often the most dangerous. We'll see you next time.